Hey guys, welcome back to the Desk Corner. Welcome to the third and final part in the Rosa Parks drawing series. The first video I posted was early March, and now it's kind of towards the end of March. It's been like 3 weeks, so if you've seen those videos before, I hope that you enjoy this one, the final part, and if you haven't seen them and you want to check them out and see how I was able to create her face and everything like that, then you can go back and watch those. I'll link them down below. I actually am recording this for like the third time now because my microphone was not working properly, so I'm going to try to remember what I was saying in the previous attempts to record. I have recorded like half of the video so far, and then I realized that the microphone just wasn't hooked up properly, which, you know, that's pretty great. If you make videos, you've probably had moments like these as well. My mouth is getting a little bit dry here, but you can bear with me, guys. So in this part, I'm working on Rosa Parks' hair, which happens to be pulled up into a bun in the reference photo that I'm using. And I'm also going to work a bit on her clothing, which was kind of interesting. And I'm going to do some final touches on her face as well, which I always like to do when I'm finishing up a portrait. So I do want to first of all tell you what technique I'm using on the hair. I'm using the Cretacolor pencils, which you know if you've seen the previous 2 videos in this series, and I'm using my Faber Castell Graphite, sometimes Staedtler, but I don't think I use them too much in this video, because for hair I like to use the Faber Castell, which create finer lines, I believe, and are just kind of a harder core pencil. And what I'm doing here is first adding in where the shadows are like I would normally for shading anything, but all the time I'm paying attention to the direction and kind of the shape that each piece of hair, not piece of hair, but each kind of group of hair forms, and I'm working kind of on one group at a time so I don't lose track of what I'm doing, and then I'm just adding in the shadows, midtones, and highlights, and a few details which kind of just look a little bit like strands of hair, but you don't want the entire thing to be just strands of hair because then it's going to look a little bit like it's not put together and it kind of just ends up looking like separate lines. It's better to do some more shading, which is what I'm doing here, and then at the end you can add in some details that look like hair strokes, but the entire thing does not need to be hair strokes. That being said, you do want to shade in the direction that the hair is going and not random directions, of course. In comparison to skin, you don't need to make it quite as smooth, and your pencil lines can show a little bit more because that's kind of how the details of hair look. So that's the technique that I'm using here. So for this drawing, I'm obviously using a combination of charcoal and graphite, but I have gotten a few comments about how sometimes charcoal doesn't mix well with graphite, and I kind of agree with those actually. It's only really the Cretacolor pencils that I find work really well with graphite because they just blend in and the tone is not too off-putting or different compared to maybe the generals or other charcoal like that, where it's probably easier to use those on their own in a work to make sure it looks more cohesive. However, when I have used charcoal that's a little softer and messier and darker, like generals for example, I find that I'm not able to get in those finer details in a portrait, so I end up using graphite for some of those and it blends in all right. But I understand your guys' point when you say that sometimes charcoal and graphite don't really work together. It just really depends. I really recommend the Cretacolor pencils for that, as they don't cause any mess and they work really well with graphite. As you guys can see, it just looks like it really blends together and with the graphite and doesn't look too off-putting. It just adds the right amount of shadows and contrast, which you wouldn't get with the graphite alone. So that is also, oh, I didn't mention, but they also stay sharp a lot more easily than normal charcoal, which really helps when working with graphite, and you want your pencils to be sharp when working on fine details as it is. That's where charcoal can be a struggle. I think I need to put out some charcoal tutorials with pretty much using just charcoal, because I think some of you guys are interested in charcoal as well on its own. And I do have some other brands of charcoal I could use for that to provide or to create videos that are a little bit more charcoal oriented, since it's mostly been graphite that I've talked about on my channel recently. But anyways, you can see I'm still working on the hair. Since this is lighter hair, I'm not going to be adding quite as many dark shadows. There are some areas that are still pretty dark, and when you have light hair, you're still going to get that. But for the most part, overall, the midtones and everything like that are a little lighter than what you would get if I was doing darker hair or something like that. And I'm just trying to smooth it out. Like sometimes you see me using a Q-tip, you see me using the Tombow Mono Zero eraser a ton just to pull out highlights and create strands of hair. And you can use a Tombow eraser to pull out strands, individual detail like strands of hair that are lighter, which is what I love about that eraser, is it's small enough that you can do that. And I definitely use that in like all of my drawings and recommend it if you don't already have it. Maybe at this point, Cretacolor and Tombow should just sponsor me because I pretty much promote their products in all of my videos at this point. But yeah, let's just move on from that. Oh, you can see I've kind of added some hair details. My absolute favorite part about hair is when you add in all those extra strands and flyaways at the end, and it just makes it completely come to life and not look as uniform and structured. And I like to do that with graphite. Sometimes I'll go in with the charcoal to make some little parts of a strand darker, but I definitely don't want to press too hard because I want it to look light like individual strands of hair would. And I like to kind of stroke my pencil the same way as I would if I was creating eyelashes or hair strokes to do that. And it's really fun. I even use the Tombow eraser to do that with some flyaways. As you can probably see on her actual hair, there are some flyaways that are white, and that's what I used my Tombow eraser for. So it's really fun for me to create flyaways. I don't know if everybody else is the same way or if I'm just weird about that. That's like my favorite part of drawing hair though. And when it comes to clothing, I always get really confused, especially in a grayscale reference photo, because I can't really tell what's what. I'm pretty sure she was wearing a scarf of some sort. This whole thing is just, it has a pattern on it, but I can't really, it's kind of like a floral pattern, but it's hard to tell shapes from each other, so I end up just kind of drawing and shading what I see, even though I sometimes don't really know what it is, but that's okay. That's pretty much what I was doing here. Mostly I was using the Cretacolor because this area was really, really dark, and that's where these come in handy because I can really get that contrast and not that shiny graphite finish, since charcoal pencils are matte, which really, really helps me out here, because sometimes when you're trying to press hard with graphite to get a darker result, you just end up with graphite shine, and I don't like that. It doesn't really help with the contrast, and in certain lighting it doesn't look good. And I'm still going to get graphite shine just because I did use graphite on her face and everything like that and her hair, but it seems to get worse the more layers and the darker that you try to go with graphite, which is why you guys don't see me using graphite on its own very often. I don't really preferably use it on its own anymore. I used to when I was new with graphite, but now I just don't like to because I never really get the right amount of contrast when I do that. Now the Cretacolor pencils do range from hard, medium, soft to extra soft, and compared to like the Generals or other charcoal pencils that also have that type of range, the Cretacolor actually gets darker when you get to the softer range pencils like soft and extra soft, and lighter with the medium and hard. And usually with other charcoal pencils, even though the actual charcoal itself is harder, it's not going to be very much lighter than the softer range pencils. So for example, for Generals, you can get like, I think a 2B or 4B or 6B, and they vary in softness, but not so much in value, whereas the Cretacolor do vary in value as well. So my medium and hard pencils are not going to create quite as dark as a value as the soft and extra soft do, and I just vary between which ones I'm using depending on, I guess, what I'm trying to do, or if I'm working on a larger area or a detail area. I don't feel like this part is all too interesting for you guys to watch because it's kind of just the same process over and over. But you can see I'm going really, really dark for some areas on the scarf with my extra soft and soft pencil. And you just don't get as much dust with these pencils as you do with other charcoal, even when you go extremely dark like that, which is great because then you don't get as much smearing. It's still going to come off and get on your hands and things like that sometimes, but it doesn't smear and create nearly as much dust as normal charcoal does, so definitely fun using these pencils and not worrying too much about the mess. I feel like I kind of, ended this awkwardly, like where the end of the reference photo was. I kind of just stopped shading, and it doesn't look like it fades out in a very nice way, and there's no border. So I don't really know what you guys do in regards to this. Do you like to fade out your drawings? Do you like to make sure that they fill up the page full scale? Do you create a border? I don't know. Sometimes mine just end randomly in a random spot and they just look kind of awkward. And that's what happened with this one. I tried to make the line somewhat even though. Oh, and I still have to work on her shoulder here, of course, too, because that would be awkward if I didn't work on her shoulder. I just left that part blank. But that wasn't too hard for me to do. Now, at first I thought maybe the scarf area, the neck area and everything is a little too dark in comparison to like her hair and her face and everything, but I really think that adding that extra contrast to match what you see in the reference photo is super important, and that's what I saw in the reference photo. And I did often go back and try to darken up shadows in the corners of her lips and her eyes and her hair and everything, just to make sure that there were some areas that were pretty dark so that it didn't look like the only dark areas were in her clothing and I guess the shadows underneath her chin and by her neck. So, it's just kind of a process of going back and looking at your reference photo and then seeing how everything looks all together cohesively in your drawing and then adjusting things to your liking. And I think that's just the process of it. I'm never fully done with a certain area until I finish the whole drawing and I know that that area looks good in comparison to the rest of the drawing. I know I haven't given too many tips as far as the clothing goes, but one thing I always like to be careful of is making sure the edges of the clothing don't look too sharp or cartoony. So I try to make sure that they look soft often, since fabric is soft, and depending on what kind of fabric you're trying to draw, it's probably going to be a different texture for every different drawing that you're doing. So the texture was not too hard for me to render with this particular drawing. And then now I'm just going in and adding some more details and all those final touches I was telling you guys about, and some highlights with my Tombow Mono Zero eraser. I think too many highlights that I then had to go and fix on the lips there, but you guys get the idea. I just like to add in all those final touches, and it almost feels like you could keep going, but at some point you just have to stop and say that it's done, because as us artists know, it's never truly done. You could always add more, and I kind of struggle with that sometimes too. But this is how it turned out. I know you can't see the whole thing right now. You'll be able to see it in a few seconds. I was really proud of this drawing. I love this drawing. And even though it took me a while to do throughout the month, I think that it just turned out really good. And I'm really happy with it, so let me know what you guys think about it. I do have it posted over on my Instagram at alexiscassandraart, which is a little bit dead at the moment, and I don't post as much over there, but I did post the final picture, and I'm planning on creating some better quality posts and being a little bit better on there at some point. But, I always say that, and it doesn't really work out too well, but follow me on there if you're interested in that. And here's my final drawing. I'm just going to sign it now, which is my favorite part. One of my favorite parts, other than adding final details. So with that, I think that's all I have for you guys today in this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you enjoyed the process of me working on this drawing over the span of a few videos. Don't forget to leave a comment down below, let me know if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!